Good afternoon, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate, and today I would like to talk to you about one of my favorite Disney Pixar movies, Inside Out. You've probably seen multiple video essays on this movie, or just heard about it online if you haven't seen it for yourself, and how great it is and how it represents teen psychology and, all this really good stuff. And it does do all of those things. But I want to talk less about the movie than about the societal ethos out of which it is coming. So, to set the stage here, we have a prepubescent girl, Riley. She is 11 years old at the start of the movie. And at the very start of the movie, her family moves from Minnesota to San Francisco in California. So she's excited about the move, and she is hoping to make a lot of great new friends and, get to this great new house. But before any of this occurs, we are introduced to the actual main characters of this story. The main character of this story is not exactly Riley. Stick with me here. The main characters are her 5 primary emotions. Now, in actual psychology, you have more than just 5 primary emotions. I believe that surprise is another one, and I can't remember the other, but I think there are 7 rather than 5. But there wasn't enough room to include some of them. So Riley's 5 primary emotions are joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. Those actually are primary emotions, so that part is real. A lot of this movie is accurate to real psychological studies, and there was a great deal of work put in by Disney and Pixar's teams in order to make this movie do all the good research for it, like they do, right? Um, from the very beginning of the movie, though, everything focuses on the characterizations of these emotions more so than on Riley herself. They live inside her head and they pilot what's going on in her life in terms of her emotional landscape, which really is what colors your whole world, which is why they are literally colorful personalities. But they are the main characters, not so much with Riley. From the very beginning, you see a dichotomy created between joy and sadness. They don't like each other, they don't understand each other, they don't get along. You see, though, that joy is much more domineering than sadness, but sadness is much more intelligent than joy. I want to talk about that dynamic of things in the actual cultural ethos of what's going on in modern day America. And this has been going on for a lot longer than just since the 2000s, shall we say. One of the primary ideas of American culture and the American dream is that one lives in order to be happy. That is the primary focus of our life. That should be the primary point of our life. Individual happiness. America is a very individualist nation when it comes to its politics, when it comes to the things about which the politicians concern themselves, but it does so, as I say, on an individualist level. One of the unfortunate aspects of this is that if you cannot maintain your own happiness, it's part of the cultural ethos that you might be seen as weaker than, as lesser than the so-called normal human being who can maintain their own happiness. Currently in America, roughly 40% of the population suffers from some form of depressive disorder. So I'm talking unipolar and bipolar depression, okay? These are 2 different disorders. Unipolar means that you're just down, okay? Whereas bipolar means that you will often be down, but you'll also have up days. And depression, by the way, does not mean sadness. Depression and sadness, as examined in this movie, are not the same thing. Sadness is sadness. It helps you cry. It's seen as the opposite of happiness. But depression is the lack of any emotion. One of the primary conceits of this movie is that it is actually necessary to feel sadness in order to avoid depression. Depression largely is the outwardly imposed notion that you cannot be allowed to feel certain emotions. This is true for everyone everywhere, but I find that this very heavy hammer falls worse on men than it does on women, because men, especially in Western culture, are expected to be stoic, to be emotionally stable. And another aspect of this is that men are not permitted to show great extremes of emotion, except in 3 cases. Four cases, sorry. Weddings, funerals, war, and sports. When you are engaged in watching the Super Bowl, it is permissible, if you are a man, to get up on your feet and scream and, clap and cheer. And it's also permissible to apparently throw a riot if your team loses, or even if your team wins sometimes. You see this with hockey in Canada as well, to a slightly lesser extent, but not as much. To stay on topic, though, sadness and depression are made distinct from one another in this movie, in that when Riley at the end of the movie becomes depressed because of her internal separation from her emotions, her control panel inside of her head fades to black, and none of her emotions, including sadness, are able to fix this until there's the realization from Joy, who had always been at the head of the team, that sadness is literally the only emotion that can fix this. They've tried to make Riley angry, they've tried to make her happy, they've tried to make her afraid. They can't. They can't. And sadness's function here is to awaken Riley to the reality of her emotional state. She is sad because of the move away from Minnesota and to California, because of the separation from her childhood home, from her childhood friends, and, everything she knew when she was 11 and younger. And until she embraces that sadness, she is not able to function emotionally, mentally, physically, in some cases, socially, absolutely. And this also applies to other characters in the movie. You see that in the different control rooms, like everyone's brain in this movie is mapped out as a kind of control center for the whole body, right? And Riley's emotions all stand around a control panel, whereas in her father's brain and her mother's brain, the emotions are portrayed as seated, and there's always one emotion at the forefront. For her mother, it's actually sadness. For Riley, it's always been joy. And for her father, it's anger. Now, that does not necessarily speak negatively to either of the parents, by the way, because as I said at the beginning, sadness is a more intelligent emotion than joy, as portrayed in this movie. I don't know how true to life that is, but if we are to be emotionally honest with ourselves, we also need to recognize when we are sad and be capable of letting that out. And that, I think, is an intelligent response to something that has gone wrong in our lives. The death of a pet, moving away from your childhood home, you know, being locked up during, the current crisis, which I'm not technically allowed to name because YouTube dings those now. Wink, wink, wink. But Riley's emotions are all standing up because she is prepubescent. It is portrayed that she doesn't have the best control or grasp of her emotions yet, So there's more of a swing around between her emotions in this movie. And while Joy asserts herself to be at the forefront, and she mostly is, there's also more room for flexibility in Riley's mind than in either of her parents' minds. With her father's primary emotion being anger, I think that speaks a little bit to, I might get in trouble for this, but the hypermasculinity of American culture. Men, as I said, are supposed to have stronger working emotions than women, and sadness is seen in the hypermasculine ethos as a weak emotion. Men are not allowed to cry except at weddings, funerals, war, and sports. Pretty much, okay? Whereas men are allowed to feel anger over many, 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 many different things because anger is seen as a stronger emotion than sadness. The reality of it is, anger is not a strong emotion if it is not properly channeled. You need to be intelligent with your anger as well. And intelligent anger can lead to great social and personal change. You see this with Martin Luther, you see this with Malcolm X, you see this even with Gandhi. The people around him were all extraordinarily angry, and he was angry at the injustice in India, but he led a strictly nonviolent revolution against the English, and they actually left. And it was great for India that they did. But while anger can be channeled in very constructive ways, the problem with modern day society in the West is that really, truly and honestly, we are so well off that what we complain about, if we are in the upper echelons of society, towards the top of the pyramid, what we complain about doesn't really have much bearing on what I would call real life. Like the whole idea of men are the most oppressed minority in Western history. No, come on, come on. Like, I'm a feminist, okay? So just throwing it out there, but well, I don't see male control as a bad thing necessarily. It all depends on how you work it. The fact that men have in the West been in power for so long and so solidly without making any room to share does not speak well to our society, especially when it came to things like colonialism and the world wars and 9/11, all the really bad disasters that the West have seen. Because foreign policy as dictated by males, I'm not saying, by the way, that it would be any better dictated by females. It's just we haven't tried that yet. But American foreign policy is often, if not usually, very unkind to the actual oppressed minorities under America's thumb throughout the world. And you can find a lot of information about all the wars that America has started outside of its own boundaries. Look at Central America, okay? If you see a country on the map that has a leftist government or has had a leftist government, look to history for American intervention in that country because it will be there. America establishes dictatorship through democracy, which is kind of oxymoronic if you ask me. But in addressing what happens in the movie, Riley is not able to constructively channel her emotions in order to express how she really feels about what's going on around her until the very end of the movie when she allows herself to really feel sadness. And the whole idea behind that is that she is literally on a bus going north back to Minnesota before she realizes, I can't do this. I'm only 11 years old. They try to make her afraid. The emotions inside her head try to make her afraid. That doesn't work. What eventually does work is Joy giving over her position of control to sadness and saying, now I understand why we need you. And sadness is the one who is capable of turning off Riley's depression. Not how this works in real life, by the way. If you have chronic depression, while it's definitely constructive to allow yourself to feel your emotions, it's not going to be the case necessarily that you're going to be able to. A lot of the times people need help in channeling their emotions very well, and that even applies to sadness. Like, I've heard it said that if you're feeling angry or if you're feeling sad, at least you're feeling something, which means that it's better than depression. But people with chronic depression, especially if it's very bad, might not be capable of feeling either of those things, even though they're considered negative emotions, and will need help to get even to those points. So the portrayal of Riley's turnaround, in a second on the bus on the way home north, not necessarily realistic, especially since it was done through sadness rather than through fear. If I were an 11-year-old girl doing this, my turnaround would be through fear, not through sadness. But Riley kind of, you see the expression on her face when she's on the bus. It's like everything sort of gets brighter. But, she says to herself internally, I need my family. I have to go home. I have to be with my family, not because they're worried about me, but because I need them. And she recognizes the fact that she is not capable of dealing with what has gone on since the beginning of the movie without getting external help. And that actually, therapeutically speaking, is the first step to healing. The first step to healing is realizing that, sorry, this is cliche, but realizing that you have a problem and knowing that you may not be able to solve it on your own. If you are able to solve it on your own, cool. Usually people won't be, though. And it's in cases like those, so like 90% of cases, where people will need external help, external motivation, in order to get them back into a healthier than depression state of mind. So, anger and sadness are both healthier than depression, and they are both essential components of the human condition. We are thinking rational animals, yes, but when we put aside all emotion in the face of pure rationality, we are letting go of our humanity. There is a key component to being human in our emotions. If we were not able to feel 24/7, we would not be as healthy as we could potentially be. That's why the human brain has the capacity for emotion at all. We need it because we're animals, but we also need it because we are specifically social animals. We communicate through our emotions. My advisor has said to me, yes, we can tell when you're getting passionate about something because you'll start talking louder and you'll start talking faster. And that is one of my cues for, yes, I am actually invested in this topic. So, for as tangential as I can be, and I know that I can be, at the same time, I do mean what I'm saying, especially when I start talking like this. Okay. But when it comes to the whole, Western ideal of pure rationality over emotionality, if that's a word, we can't do that. We're not made to do that. We're not constructed to do that. And the whole idea, too, of stronger versus weaker emotions, to me, is BS. Because it's the strong emotions, no offense to the warmongers, but it's the strong emotions that keep our society from actually flourishing. If we could let go of our anger, if we could let go of our aggression towards people we don't know, towards people who do not care about us and about whom we do not care, just live and let live? I mean, is that a thing that we're capable of doing as a species, please? We are emotional animals and we all want ostensibly the same things, okay? Everyone wants to be happy. And by the way, I don't go into this saying that there is any problem with being happy at any given time. Just that we need a balance between happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, and what was the other one? Fear. And the other two which I can't remember exactly what they were, because they're not portrayed in the movie, but there are two other fundamental emotions. Surprise being one of them, and I can't remember the last one. But what we need to learn collectively as a society, as a hemisphere of the world, although, again, in this sense, we're not talking about the global West, we're talking about the mindset that is the West, capital W, right? What we need to collectively learn is to channel our emotions, both strong and, quote, weak, both positive and negative, in constructive ways. People are very capable of channeling their anger, their sadness, their misanthropy, their fear into great works of art, into great civil liberty movements, into, all these different things that can come out of suffering. I'm not saying, by the way, that suffering is needed for, say, a great work of art, but I am saying that suffering is needed for social liberation, because if we don't understand how other people suffer around us, we're not going to want to do anything about anything. The whole idea of us being a social species is that we are capable of understanding both one another's joy and one another's pain. And primarily one another's pain, because it is also in human nature to want to fix that for other people, so long as you're not so wrapped up in yourself that you don't care about other people's suffering. And I think that tapping into anger in a very negative way is what makes us capable of that degree of selfishness. It's like, I am oppressed. It's all about me and my problems, and no one else's problems matter in the face of mine. But here's the thing: if you are white and English speaking and living in the West, and especially in America or in England, especially in Europe, you are wealthier than about 90% of the rest of the world. So if you think of it that way, like, look at things on a global scale, not just on an individualist scale. America, in my eyes, is too much of an individualist country. This applies to Canada, by the way. This also applies to us. I don't want to say that we're America Junior, but we have our own problems. Oh my God, do we have our problems. So that is something that we can take care of by actually looking to other peoples, other countries, and saying, what do they have that we don't versus what do they not have that we do? And if we open ourselves up to other perspectives, we're going to be able to understand what we're doing wrong and what we could be doing better for other people and for ourselves. Because we are a social species, and I've said this a billion times, we need one another. This also applies on a global scale, okay? If you try to hoard away all the happiness, if you try to hoard away all the wealth, if you try to hoard away all the prosperity, I mean, you can't, because what is everyone else going to do? And the whole idea, by the way, that money makes you happy is kind of not true. Up to a certain limit, it does, but after that limit, and I believe it's about $60,000 a year, that's all you need for the happiness index to still apply to money, okay? That's still quite a lot of money compared to what the vast majority of people on Earth make daily or yearly. I think that beyond that, we need to get better at sharing with one another, not only sharing our stuff, but also sharing our emotions. Because one of the points that this movie makes is that if we bottle things up and keep it to ourselves in the name of, I have to be happy all the time and this is the face that I'm presenting to my world, that's not healthy. If you bottle something up, and the whole thing about, like, putting the lid on the bottle of pop and shake, 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 right? If you pop the lid off, right, all the pop just sprays out of the top because you put it under so much pressure. For Riley, the tipping point was, what was her tipping point? Oh yeah. Her tipping point basically acted as, the lid coming off the bottle, and now she's doing something frantic in order to save herself from having to live in this world that was completely beyond her control, by the way. Like, she's only 11 years old. She couldn't dictate where her family lived, anything like that. But the idea was that she bottled things up for too long, and not permitting herself to feel made her incapable of feeling. I ought to edit what I said, by the way. You will either explode or you will regress and repress, because you bottle something up long enough, it might just, well, not die necessarily, but you might not be able to access it either. It's like intentionally pushing away a memory. I've done this before. I'm sure other people have done this before. But the idea is that you hide it even from yourself, to the extent that you can only reach it if you try really hard, or your subconscious mind can reach it, because your subconscious is a lot smarter than your conscious mind. And that also, by the way, plays into this movie, because when joy and sadness are stuck down in Riley's subconscious, you see a lot of her greatest fears and a lot of her deadened memories that she no longer has consciously, but they're still there. Like, the brain itself, let's talk about the physical system, has over a trillion of what are called synapses, which are little links between two infinitesimally small parts of the brain. And for each synapse, there can be a function or a memory, or a part of a function or a part of a memory. Given that you have over a trillion of these things, there's a lot that your brain can do that you are not consciously aware of. Right now, for example, you are breathing, and me saying that just made you aware of it. But ordinarily, you're not even aware of the fact that you're breathing. No one has to sit there and go, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out for it to happen. Your brain just does it. Your brain just blinks. Your brain just swallows, usually. Like right now, I'm kind of moving my feet around, and I'm not doing that consciously, except that I am now because I'm thinking about it, right? But if you don't think about a thing, it will keep on happening regardless of what you're doing. There's the conscious mind, and there's the unconscious mind, and both of these things are you, but one of them is more of the you that you present to the world, right? Right now, I am consciously speaking, even though I'm not doing a very good job. Sorry, I'm kind of tired. But at the same time, I am also scratching my back. That was a conscious thing, but me being aware of that itch was unconscious until I chose to address it. You see what I mean here? Like, there's a whole bunch that your body just does that is beyond the control of your conscious mind, and depression is also one of these things. You can't just choose to be happy. All right. That is a completely false belief that people use when they want to frame depression as a form of weakness and as something that weakens the species. That's not what depression is. That is not what depression does. You cannot choose to be depressed. You cannot choose to be happy. Okay? No one walks around 24/7 in a state of conscious and fully in their control happiness. You can't do that. It's not sustainable. You can choose to be happy in the moment, but if you're in a really negative situation, like let's say you're caught in a house fire, just as an extreme example here, if you're caught in a house fire, you're not going to be able to choose to be afraid. That's just going to happen automatically. But if you say to yourself, oh no, it's fine that all my stuff is burning up and I need to get out of the house because my shirt just got fire, that is, well, stupid, but that's also you choosing to ignore the gravity of the situation, shall we say. Most people don't do that, okay? You can't choose to be happy all the time. And hey, when you're asleep, you're not making any choices at all. Your brain still dreams, but you don't choose what you dream about. You can't choose whether you are feeling certain things in your dream. you know, just a whole bunch of what goes on inside the head is beyond our control. And in Riley's case, her depression was situational. There are two different kinds of depression, if not more, but there's chronic depression, which, as the name implies, is all the time, and that is a mental disorder. And there's situational depression, which is brought on, as the name implies, by situations that go on in your life. Okay. Riley, having moved from Minnesota to San Francisco, became situationally depressed because her family was kind of unavailable. Her friends from back home were not available to her anymore, except over her laptop, but their lives were going on without her. And she felt like she was stuck in a rut and she couldn't move forward. She didn't like the new house. She didn't like the new school. She didn't feel like she was making any friends. And that is very bad for the psyche of a teenage girl, or just pretty much anyone, not just a teenage girl, by the way. Because, again, we're a social species, we need other people to be happy. But when Riley was stuck in this situation, it made her depressed because she doesn't have control over that. And the only thing that made it better was the realization of her social function. We need other people, as I keep saying. And she realized that she was not strong enough to contend with what was going on around her without the help of other people, which is why at the very end she gets off the bus and runs home. And it's one of my favorite moments I've ever seen in cinema is when she is hugging her mother and her father, and there's just this that comes over her face. It's the most beautiful expression I've ever seen on an animated face. And you're not going to convince me, by the way, that this is the first time she's ever had a nuanced emotion, but her brain produces the emotion of bittersweet, which is the conjunction of happiness and sadness, the two of them finally working together in harmony. You're not going to convince me, by the way, movie, that this is the first time Riley has ever felt a, shall we call them, combination emotion in her life, okay? Being competitive, for example. She's a hockey player. Being competitive can be a mix of happiness and anger. And you actually see that on her mental landscape at the end of the movie when it kind of pans out and shows all the different nuances of memory that she's able to form now. You see a combination of anger and happiness, and I think it has to do with hockey. I can't quite see inside the orbs. Like, every memory she has is like basically a picture contained inside this little orb with colors on it to signify what emotion it deals with. But yeah, okay. Competitiveness, as I say, is a mix, or could be a mix, of happiness and anger. You know, fear and sadness coming together could be something like dread. Um, you know, disgust and joy together could be something like envy. It's like, oh, I really want that. Oh, but I don't have the money. Oh, that. How dare they be able to have that and not me, kind of thing. You know, but there are many, many different nuances of emotion that I don't believe you would only be capable of feeling once you'd attained a certain age. Like, even infants, to an extent, are capable of feeling nuanced emotions. Um, it is definitely true that your emotions are simpler when you're a child than when you're an adult, or when you're prepubescent in Riley's case. But just the fact that this is the first time that sadness and happiness have ever worked together in her brain, that strikes me as completely unrealistic. The primary message of this movie, though, is to allow yourself to be in touch with your emotions. And this is a really, really important message for people in our current society because of the thing I'm not allowed to talk about. And people are getting really depressed about it because a lot of people are cut off from their family, from their friends. You know, the thing I'm not allowed to talk about is really, really bad for your mental health. So if there's any way you can reach out to someone you love, please do it face to face in some form, Zoom, Skype, Facebook chat, or Facebook Live, whatever it's called. I can't remember, I don't care. That kind of thing. Or even just call them up and hear their voice. It's a lot better for your mental health to actually have that connection than it is just to type back and forth. Because the other person might be there, but there's no sensory perception exactly. You can see their words, but you can't hear the nuances of emotion that's going on with them. Because again, we connect through our emotions, through our emotionality. We, shall we say, speak a language of emotion. There's really no way even to make a good speech without putting some emotion behind it. No one likes listening to someone who talks like this, without any verbal nuance, because that's just boring. Pure rationality is not only impossible for human beings, but even if it were possible, it would be boring, because it's emotions that put the spice in the stew. Thank you. So that is my discussion about / rant about Inside Out, and there's probably a lot that I missed, but I hope that I managed to cover at least the main points and the main conceit of the movie, which is to connect to one another and connect to your own mental and emotional landscape, and that is the way to be a healthy, functional human being. If you have chronic depression, this movie is not a call out of people with chronic depression, okay? But the same strategy may apply. Connect to other people insofar as you're capable of doing so. Because, again, for the kabillionth time, we are social creatures and we need one another to survive. So, hopefully, that is a concise enough analysis that people haven't done to death yet. But it's probably been done because a lot about this movie has been done. I actually recommend Cinema Therapy's video on this movie because they're really good. And it's one of my favorite videos from them, and I really like them anyway. So go ahead and watch theirs as well. Like, share, subscribe, bitch at me in the comments, and that'll be great. And engage with one another. Alright, so that's my video for today. Can't remember what we're doing tomorrow, but I have the master list. Woohoo! Alright, have a lovely, wonderful day. Hopefully it's sunnier where you are than it is where I am, because clouds. Mwah! Bye!